Ethan Blake's office was an empire in glass and steel. From his corner on the 50th floor, he could see the city sprawling like a beast he had tamed. Every inch of his world reflected precision and control, but today his hand trembled as he adjusted his cufflinks. Not from fear Ethan Blake didn't fear, but from the weight of a plan that had been growing for weeks. Behind his calm exterior was a man on the verge of detonation. Ethan, at 45, was the CEO of one of the city's most powerful firms. A master manipulator, he wore charm like armor, but now, under the polished surface, he was a predator stalking his prey. His prey? Olivia Carter, his wife of 5 years. Ethan suspected Olivia of infidelity. He'd found traces, nothing overt, just whispers of a lie. A receipt from a hotel in Chicago when she claimed to be at a charity gala. A lingering glance she'd given another man at a dinner party, and a faint scent of unfamiliar cologne on her coat. Ethan didn't confront her outright. That wasn't his style. Confrontation was clumsy, emotional. He preferred precision. Olivia was upstairs in their penthouse, unaware of the storm brewing beneath her feet. She was an enigma to him now. Once the love of his life, now a stranger dressed in silk. As Ethan planned his next move, he stared at her reflection in his mind. Perfect, poised, but undeniably distant. Ethan tapped a pen against his desk, the rhythm a metronome for his thoughts. Sophia, he called, his voice cutting through the silence. Sophia Bennett entered briskly. His secretary was a study in contrasts, unassuming yet sharp, modest yet impossible to ignore. She was 29, a workhorse in a world of show ponies, and the only person Ethan trusted to execute his ideas without question. "Cancel my afternoon meetings," he said. "I need to focus on Friday's party." Sophia hesitated. "Anything specific I should arrange?" Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "Make it unforgettable." Sophia nodded, her unease hidden behind her professionalism. Ethan's parties were legendary for their extravagance, but this one felt different. She couldn't shake the sense that it wasn't just business, it was personal. Olivia in the penthouse upstairs. Olivia adjusted a diamond earring in front of the mirror. The city lights framed her like a painting, but her reflection felt hollow. She'd married Ethan for love, or at least she'd believed that once. Now their life was a gilded cage, every moment curated for appearances, every flaw hidden behind wealth. 3 months ago she'd made a mistake. A hotel bar. A stranger named Liam. A night she'd convinced herself would fill the void Ethan left with his endless meetings and icy indifference. It hadn't. Olivia thought about confessing, but the idea of facing Ethan's wrath was paralyzing. He was a man who crushed his enemies, and she feared what he'd do if he saw her as one. Clara Morrison, her closest confidant, had told her to let it go. "Men like Ethan don't forgive, Liv," she'd said over wine one night. "Just be perfect and keep your head down." But Olivia wasn't sure she could. Sophia worked late that night, the glow of her computer screen the only light in the office. She was used to long hours. Ethan expected nothing less. But this time, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She'd seen the way Ethan's jaw tightened when he talked about Olivia. She noticed the subtle digs he made in meetings when Olivia's name came up. And now this party, a spectacle even by Ethan's standards. Sophia wasn't nosy, but she was observant. Her job demanded it. She began piecing together fragments of conversation and fleeting expressions, and an unsettling picture began to emerge. The invitation by Wednesday, the invitations were sent. Hand-delivered, as Ethan insisted. The city's elite, its power brokers and socialites, RSVP'd within hours. When Olivia read hers, a chill ran down her spine. Ethan rarely involved her in his business affairs unless there was an ulterior motive. "Friday night?" she asked at dinner that evening. Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. "It's important." "To you?" Olivia muttered under her breath. Ethan looked at her sharply but said nothing. Silence had become their default language, and Olivia hated how loud it felt. The penthouse, was transformed into a palace of glass and light by Friday evening. Chandeliers sparkled above a sea of black ties and designer gowns. Ethan worked the room like a politician, shaking hands and offering smiles that never reached his eyes. Sophia arrived late, reluctantly dressed in an elegant but understated gown. She hated these events, the false warmth and the hidden daggers. But as Ethan's secretary, she couldn't avoid them. "Miss Bennet," Marcus Hale greeted her, a high-ranking executive with a penchant for leering. "You clean up well." Sophia forced a polite smile, sidestepping him as quickly as possible. She noticed Olivia standing by the balcony, alone, her hand gripping a champagne flute like a lifeline. Ethan's eyes followed Olivia's every move. He watched as Marcus approached her, leaning in too close, his hand brushing her arm. Olivia didn't pull away, and Ethan's jaw tightened. Tension built. Sophia found herself pulled into conversations with Ethan's clients, her role as a buffer clear. Ethan introduced her to influential guests, praising her work in a way that felt deliberate. It didn't escape her notice that Olivia was left to fend for herself. When Liam arrived, uninvited, Olivia froze. Her worst fear had materialized. He looked out of place among the polished crowd, his nervous energy drawing attention. Ethan spotted him immediately, and a slow, dangerous smile crept across his face. Sophia noticed too. She turned to Ethan. "Who's that?" "Someone important," he replied cryptically. Olivia excused herself from Marcus and made a beeline for Liam. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice frantic. "I got an invitation," he said, his eyes darting around the room. "I thought you shouldn't have come." Olivia cut him off. Across the room, Ethan raised his glass. "Attention, everyone." The crowd hushed, turning toward him. Olivia's heart sank as she realized she was trapped in the center of his web. "Tonight, we celebrate loyalty," Ethan began, his voice smooth but laced with venom. "It's the cornerstone of trust. Without it, what are we?" He glanced at Olivia, his gaze piercing. Some betrayals cut deeper than others. But the truth always finds a way. Olivia felt the room spinning. Whispers spread like wildfire as guests exchanged confused glances. Ethan's smile was a knife, and it was pointed directly at her. The party had set the tone, a tension-laden battlefield where words were weapons and every glance carried hidden meaning. Ethan Blake's meticulously orchestrated evening was far from over. His scheme had only begun, and the players, Olivia, Sophia, and even the unsuspecting Liam, were maneuvering through an intricate maze where Ethan held all the cards. But the threads of control were more fragile than even he realized, and the deeper they all stepped into the web, the more tangled and dangerous it became. A night of dancing and daggers. Sophia lingered near the bar, cradling a glass of sparkling water as she scanned the crowd. The atmosphere was thick with artificial charm, false laughter, polite applause, and hushed conversations masking deeper motives. Ethan's parties were more than social gatherings. They were chessboards, and everyone was a pawn or a piece. The dance floor cleared for them. As they swayed, their movements slow and deliberate, their smiles were thin veneers. Ethan leaned in, his voice low enough that only Olivia could hear. "Enjoying yourself?" She didn't answer immediately. Her heels clicked faintly as she turned, her dress swishing against his polished shoes. "What are you trying to prove?" "Prove?" Ethan repeated, his smirk widening. "I don't need to prove anything. This is simply a celebration of loyalty." Her breath hitched, but she refused to let him see her fear. "Loyalty isn't something you can demand, Ethan." "Oh, I disagree," he said, spinning her once with a calculated flourish. "Loyalty is earned and tested." From her vantage point by the bar, Sophia watched the exchange, her chest tightening. She couldn't hear the words, but the tension between them was palpable. When the song ended, Ethan and Olivia parted with curt nods. Olivia returned to her seat, her expression unreadable, while Ethan resumed his hosting duties, his energy colder, sharper. Sophia turned to leave the bar, eager to escape the weight of the room, but a hand touched her shoulder. It was Marcus Hale, his smile a touch too friendly. "Leaving so soon?" "I was thinking about it," she said cautiously. "Come on," Marcus said, his tone oily. "Let me introduce you to a few people. You're the talk of the office these days. Ethan can't stop praising you." Sophia stiffened. "I doubt that." Marcus laughed. "You're modest. It's refreshing. But really, you've caught his attention." His words lingered, heavy with implications. Sophia excused herself as quickly as she could, the interaction leaving her uneasy. She spotted Olivia slipping away toward the balcony and decided to follow. Secrets in the night on the balcony. Olivia leaned against the railing, her back to the city skyline. Her flawless appearance seemed to crack under the moonlight, her exhaustion and vulnerability bleeding through. "Mrs. Blake," Sophia said softly. Olivia turned, startled, but relaxed when she saw who it was. "Sophia, shouldn't you be inside?" "Shouldn't you?" Sophia countered. Olivia managed a weak smile. "Touché." She sighed, her gaze drifting to the glittering city below. "These parties, they're exhausting." Sophia hesitated before stepping closer. "You looked like you needed a moment." Olivia glanced at her, surprised by the kindness. "I did. Thank you." The silence between them was almost comfortable, but Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that Olivia was carrying something heavier than she let on. Before she could ask, Olivia spoke again. "Do you ever feel like you're just playing a role?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like no one really knows who you are?" Sophia considered the question carefully. "I think everyone feels that way sometimes, but I also think people see more than we realize." Olivia laughed bitterly. "Not in this world. Here, everyone's wearing a mask." Sophia wanted to press further, to understand what Olivia was hiding, but the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted them. Ethan appeared, his expression unreadable. "Am I interrupting?" "No," Olivia said quickly, stepping away from the railing. "We were just talking." Ethan's gaze flicked to Sophia, and for a moment, she felt like he could see right through her. "Sophia, I need you inside." She nodded, excusing herself, but as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental had just shifted. The first thread unravels inside. The party continued, but the atmosphere felt heavier. Sophia returned to the bar, observing the guests with fresh eyes. Liam lingered near the edge of the room, his presence a glaring anomaly in the sea of elegance. He caught her gaze and approached cautiously. "You're close to Ethan, right?" he asked, his voice hushed. Sophia frowned. "Why?" "I think I've made a mistake coming here," Liam admitted, his anxiety palpable. "I thought—" "You thought what?" Sophia pressed, her patience thinning. Liam hesitated, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "I thought maybe Olivia wanted me here." Sophia's stomach dropped. "You shouldn't be here," she said firmly. "Whatever's going on, this isn't the place to sort it out." Before Liam could respond, Ethan appeared out of nowhere, his presence like a shadow creeping into the light. "Is everything all right here?" Liam froze, his face paling. "Yes, of course." Ethan's smile was a razor's edge. "Good. Enjoy the party." As he walked away, his words hung in the air like a threat. Sophia turned back to Liam. "You need to leave. Now." Liam nodded, but he didn't move fast enough. A confrontation the night wore on, and the guests began to trickle out, but the core players remained. Ethan had orchestrated every moment, and now the stage was set for the finale. He gathered the remaining guests in the living room, Olivia by his side. His toast was the final dagger. "To loyalty," he said, raising his glass, "the foundation of trust, and to the truth which always has a way of coming to light." Olivia's hand trembled, but she kept her expression neutral. The guests clapped politely, oblivious to the deeper meaning, but Sophia knew better. She watched Olivia closely, her heart pounding with unease. After the toast, Olivia excused herself, retreating to the study. Ethan followed, his steps deliberate. Sophia hesitated before slipping after them, her curiosity outweighing her better judgment. She stopped outside the study. The door cracked open just enough for her to hear. "You knew," Olivia said, her voice shaking. "Of course I knew," Ethan replied, his tone cold. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Sophia's breath caught. This was it, the moment the threads of the web began to snap. "I made a mistake," Olivia admitted. "But you made this marriage a prison." Ethan's voice dropped lower. "A prison? You had everything, and you threw it away." "I needed you," Olivia said, tears in her voice. "Not your money, not your power. You." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken emotions. When Ethan finally spoke, his voice was softer but no less cutting. "This isn't about me, Olivia. It's about you. You wanted something else, and now you'll have it." The aftermath. Sophia backed away from the door, her head spinning. She returned to the main room, where the last of the guests were leaving. Marcus approached her again, but she brushed him off, her mind too preoccupied to deal with his advances. When Olivia emerged from the study, her face was pale but determined. She walked straight past Sophia without a word. Ethan followed shortly after, his expression unreadable. Sophia lingered for a moment before leaving. The tension of the evening lingered in the air, and she knew this was far from over. The morning after the party dawned with a cold, gray haze that seemed to seep into every corner of the Blake penthouse. Olivia sat in the living room, her hands trembling as she held the letter Ethan had left on the dining table. Its contents were devastatingly simple. A list of their shared assets now transferred to her name, the title to the penthouse, and the ominous final line, "Goodbye." She stared at the paper as if it were a viper poised to strike. It wasn't generosity, it was punishment. Ethan had walked away without a word, leaving her with a wealth that suddenly felt like chains. He wasn't coming back. But Olivia wasn't ready to let it end this way. A search for truth. Ethan had disappeared. Calls to his office were deflected with clipped answers. "Mr. Blake is unavailable." Even Sophia, who had worked closely with him for years, was left in the dark. When Olivia called, she hesitated before answering, unsure if she could trust the woman who had silently watched her humiliation unfold. "I don't know where he is," Sophia admitted. "He's been distant with everyone lately." Olivia's voice wavered. "If he reaches out, please tell him I need to speak with him." Sophia hesitated. "Do you really think it'll make a difference?" Olivia didn't respond. She wasn't sure herself, but she had to try. Ethan had retreated to a remote estate on the outskirts of the city. It was a place he'd purchased years ago but rarely visited. A stark, minimalist fortress surrounded by acres of woods. Here, he could be alone with his thoughts, his regrets, and the gnawing emptiness that no amount of wealth or power could fill. He sat by the fireplace, nursing a glass of whiskey as the events of the party replayed in his mind. The look on Olivia's face when he delivered his toast haunted him. He had wanted to hurt her, to make her feel the betrayal he'd felt. But now the satisfaction he'd anticipated was replaced by an aching hollowness. He had loved her once. Maybe he still did. The sound of tires crunching on gravel broke his reverie. Ethan rose, his sharp instincts returning. No one was supposed to know he was here. He grabbed a coat and stepped outside, his breath fogging in the chilly air. Olivia stood by the car, her coat wrapped tightly around her. Her hair was windswept, her eyes tired but defiant. "How did you find me?" Ethan asked, his tone colder than he intended. "You taught me how to think like you," she replied, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. Ethan's jaw tightened. "You shouldn't be here." "But I am," she said, stepping closer. "And I'm not leaving until we talk." A hellish confrontation inside the house. The tension between them crackled like the fire in the hearth. Olivia stood by the window, her reflection a ghost against the darkened glass. Ethan leaned against the mantel, his arms crossed. "Why now?" he asked. "You had months to tell me the truth." "I was scared," Olivia admitted, her voice trembling. "You're not exactly forgiving, Ethan." His eyes narrowed. You think this is about forgiveness? No, she said quickly. It's about us. Or at least it was. Ethan's laugh was bitter. Us ended the moment you slept with him. And what about you? Olivia shot back. You think I didn't notice how distant you were? How cold? You buried yourself in work. Ethan. You shut me out long before I made that mistake. For the first time, Ethan faltered. So this is my fault now? No, Olivia said, stepping closer. I'm saying we both failed. I didn't want to hurt you, Ethan. I wanted you to see me, to fight for me. But instead, you turned it into a game. Ethan looked away, the weight of her words pressing down on him. I don't want your money, Olivia continued. I don't want this penthouse or these assets you think will make up for what's broken between us. I came here because I still love you. Because despite everything, I think we can fix this. Ethan's gaze snapped back to her, a flicker of something softer breaking through his icy exterior. The test of love, he said, his voice low. You still think love is enough after what we've done to each other? Olivia nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, I do. But only if we're willing to fight for it. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he moved to the desk in the corner of the room and pulled out a small leather-bound book. He tossed it onto the coffee table between them. What's this? Olivia asked, picking it up. My journal, Ethan said, his voice tight. If you want to understand me, why I did what I did, read it. Every entry is there. The anger, the jealousy, the plans I made to destroy you. Olivia opened the book hesitantly, the weight of his words sinking in. As she read, her breath caught. Ethan's entries were raw, filled with pain and doubt. He had written about the first time he suspected her affair, the sleepless nights spent replaying their conversations, and the growing darkness inside him as he plotted his revenge. But what struck Olivia most were the entries where Ethan admitted his own failures. His guilt over neglecting her, his fear of vulnerability, and his realization that his power meant nothing without someone to share it with. When she finished, she looked up at him. Why are you showing me this? Because you need to know who I am, Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. The man you married isn't the man I've become. And maybe I can't be that man again. The turning point. Olivia placed the journal back on the table and crossed the room to stand in front of him. You're wrong, she said. You're still that man. I see him now, beneath all the anger and the walls you've built. And I'm still the woman who fell in love with you, even if I forgot how to show it. Ethan's breath hitched as her hand brushed against his. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to feel the weight of her presence, the warmth of her touch. Do you really think we can fix this? He asked, his voice tinged with vulnerability. Olivia nodded. But only if you're willing to let me in. No more games, Ethan. No more masks. He hesitated, the fortress around his heart crumbling. Then, finally, he pulled her into his arms. The embrace was tentative at first, but as Olivia melted into him, Ethan held her tighter, as if afraid she might slip away. The revelation in the quiet of the room, Ethan confessed. When I transferred everything to your name, I thought I was freeing myself. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared that if I stayed, I'd destroy the one person who ever really mattered to me. Olivia looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Then stop running, Ethan. Stay. Fight for us. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to hope. The road ahead would be long, filled with wounds that needed healing and trust that had to be rebuilt. But as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, they both knew they were ready to face it together. Their love had been tested by fire, and though it bore scars, it emerged stronger. It was no longer about power or control. It was about redemption, forgiveness, and the chance to start anew. Ethan and Olivia returned to the penthouse late that evening. The silence between them was no longer hostile. It was heavy with unspoken truths and tentative hope. The air felt different, as though the apartment itself had been waiting for this moment, holding its breath. Ethan poured himself a whiskey and sat at the edge of the couch. Olivia moved to the window, staring out at the city below, its lights pulsing like the heartbeat of something alive. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The weight of what they had just gone through lingered, thick and almost suffocating. "I don't know where we go from here," Ethan finally admitted, his voice low. Olivia turned to face him, her arms crossed protectively. "Neither do I," she said honestly. "But we can't go back to what we were. That much is clear." Ethan took a sip of his drink, his gaze distant. "I didn't think you'd come for me," he said after a moment. "Not after what I did." Olivia stepped closer, her voice soft but steady. "And I didn't think you'd care if I did. But here we are." Piecing the puzzle together, the following days were like walking a tightrope. They tiptoed around each other, avoiding their usual patterns of blame and defensiveness. Olivia spent her mornings volunteering at a nearby shelter, a project she'd taken on to rediscover herself, and her afternoons in therapy, something Clara had insisted she try. Ethan, meanwhile, kept to his office, attempting to salvage the chaos he'd created in his professional life. Sophia, as ever, was a steady presence, but even she noticed the cracks in Ethan's armor. One evening, Olivia returned home to find a familiar leather journal sitting on the coffee table. Ethan was in the kitchen preparing a rare home-cooked meal. She picked up the journal and flipped to the last entry, curious if he had written anything new since their confrontation. The entry wasn't dated but had clearly been written recently. It was raw, even more so than the previous ones, and it sent a chill through her. "I thought I could control everything. People, outcomes, emotions. None of it was supposed to escape my grasp. But Olivia's betrayal wasn't just her mistake. It was my failure too. I wanted her to hurt, to feel what I felt, but all I've done is destroy the one thing I truly cared about. Revenge isn't the answer. It never was. It's like feeding a fire that only grows until there's nothing left but ash." Olivia closed the book, her hands trembling. The words hit her harder than she expected, not because they revealed anything new, but because they showed her a side of Ethan she hadn't seen in years. Vulnerable, reflective, and human. "Did you write this for me?" she asked when Ethan appeared in the doorway. He shook his head. "I wrote it for me, but I left it there hoping you'd read it." "Why?" she pressed. "Because if we're going to move forward," Ethan said, "we need to start with the truth. No more masks. No more games." Unveiling the intrigue that night, over dinner, Olivia finally broached the question that had been haunting her. "Ethan, why did you invite Liam to the party? Did you think it would fix anything?" Ethan set down his fork, his expression unreadable. "It wasn't about fixing anything. It was about control. If I could make you feel small, humiliated, then maybe I wouldn't feel so powerless." Olivia flinched at his honesty but appreciated it nonetheless. "And now, Ethan said, "I see that it wasn't about you or Liam. It was about me. I let my fear of losing control ruin everything we had." The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down on both of them. But for the first time, Olivia felt like they were finally seeing each other. Not as adversaries, but as two broken people trying to rebuild. Sophia's revelation. Sophia had been observing everything from a distance. She was loyal to Ethan but also to her own principles, and watching him spiral over the past few months had been difficult. She decided to take matters into her own hands. One afternoon, she met Olivia at a cafe near the penthouse. Olivia, surprised by the invitation, greeted her cautiously. "I wanted to talk to you about Ethan," Sophia said. Getting straight to the point, Olivia raised an eyebrow. "What about him?" "I've worked with him for years," Sophia began, "and I've never seen him like this. Whatever you said to him when you showed up at the estate, it changed him." Olivia frowned, unsure where this was going. "Sophia, why are you telling me this?" "Because I think he needs you," Sophia said bluntly, "and not just as his wife or partner. He needs someone who can hold him accountable, who can remind him that he's more than the sum of his worst mistakes." Olivia leaned back in her chair, Sophia's words sinking in. "And what about me?" she asked quietly. "What do I need?" Sophia hesitated but finally said, "I think you need the same thing. You both do." The intrigue comes full circle. The puzzle pieces began to align as Olivia returned home that evening. She found Ethan in the study, staring at a photograph on the wall. It was from their wedding day, a candid shot of them laughing together, their love pure and unburdened by the complexities of their future. "I met with Sophia today," Olivia said, breaking the silence. Ethan turned, his expression curious. "Why?" "She thinks we can fix this," Olivia said, "but only if we're willing to fight for it." Ethan crossed the room to stand in front of her. "And do you think she's right?" Olivia hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but not if we keep running from the truth." Ethan reached for her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Then let's stop running." A trial by fire over the next several months. They committed themselves to the hard work of repairing their relationship. They attended couples therapy, unpacking years of resentment and miscommunication. They set boundaries, learned to communicate openly, and most importantly, they began to trust each other again. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the pain of the past resurfaced, threatening to undo their progress. But each time they chose to stay, chose to fight. For every step backward, there were 2 steps forward, and slowly but surely, they began to rebuild the foundation of their marriage. The final test a year later, Ethan and Olivia hosted another party at the penthouse. But this time, it wasn't a battlefield. The guest list was smaller, the atmosphere warmer. Sophia attended, along with Clara and a few close friends. There were no veiled threats, no hidden agendas, just laughter, conversation, and genuine connection. During the party, Ethan took Olivia's hand and led her to the balcony, away from the crowd. The city stretched out before them, its lights as bright as ever. "Do you remember the last time we stood here?" Ethan asked. Olivia smiled faintly. "I do. It feels like a lifetime ago." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Olivia's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple gold band. "I know we're already married," he said, "but I want this to symbolize our new beginning. No lies, no masks, just us." Tears filled Olivia's eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, "to us." The moral of the story: their journey wasn't perfect, but it was real. Ethan and Olivia's love had been tested by betrayal, anger, and despair, yet they emerged stronger, not because they ignored their past, but because they faced it head-on. The lesson was clear. Love isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about choosing to stay, to fight, and to grow together even when it seems impossible. It's about seeing each other's flaws and choosing forgiveness, not because it's easy, but because it's worth it. And as the lights of the city sparkled around them, Ethan and Olivia knew they had found something rare. A love reborn from the ashes of their pain, stronger and more enduring than ever before.